G'day there, ladies and gents of the internet. I am the Braveheart Aussie, and thank you for joining me here today for a journey in world building. I wanted to start today by letting you know that I've commenced developing an official online compendium for the Dark Diaspora universe using the tools available through World Anvil. Here you'll be able to find short articles, maps and other content relating to the project as it's being developed. This also includes initial work that I've been doing over the past several months as I start to examine individual planets and settings in the Diaspora, particularly those planets that have already been settings for the lore videos to date. Also, a quick reminder, we'll be doing our very first lore card giveaway over the next week or so. So if you'd like to get yourself an official high quality lore card for the Dark Diaspora universe, make sure you subscribe here and go and check out my Discord channel. The link is in the description below. Today we're going to look at one of the last major concepts we have before we dive into some of the amazing settings in our universe, that of war. There is a lot to cover in this topic as war and conflict feature prominently in the Diaspora as one of its grim dark elements. So we're going to structure our discussion to be focused on several major elements: the role of war, the form of war, and weapons of war. War does play a very central role in the Dark Diaspora. While the lessons from the Lost Earth instilled in many generations a fear of war and its potential for devastation, time and distance saw such trepidations fade, and within a couple of centuries, armed conflict began to present itself in the wider galaxy. Yet while armed conflict of all manner and form are prevalent, we're not talking here about galaxy-wide wars involving grand fleets between massive alliances. Instead, wars in the Diaspora tend to be local, binary, and in many cases, heavily one-sided. For many people, the drums of war are a constant factor in their lives, with whole planetary and system economies given over to the war machine. The most common conflicts are by major powers against weak and otherwise defenseless settlements, often to provide domestic political cover for what is little more than raiding and pillaging. However, at a Diaspora-wide political level, war is typically waged by a planet or regional power for two main reasons: to conquer and subsume a planet into your empire or power block, or to maximize your strategic influence against another power. In contrast, the conflict and tension between the Compact and their rival planet of Janfar and the Anuran Confederacy represents something of a Cold War that sometimes boils over into limited strikes or attacks by proxies. The reason for the limited scope of war and conflict is because of the dual impacts of economics and health. Waging war is expensive, and most planet settlements and colonies simply lack the resources to construct, crew, and arm an ongoing standing navy. Similarly, the ever-present threat of the malady means conflicts tend to be local or regional in nature, as jumping large numbers of troops and ships from one side of the galaxy to the other invariably raises the risk to the people of suffering the malady and therefore undermining the combat effectiveness of the force sent. Wars are therefore fought for all manner of reasons, with economics being a really big one. Access to major resources needed by a planet might form the basis of a war being declared, while a certain power might covet a valuable trade route of another. Of course, the conflict isn't just limited to nation states. Trade boycotts or blockades are a relatively common tactic used by the merchants of the coalition, while brutal invasions and punitive bombardments of wayward colonies by ideologically fervent Tarvan Covenant forces have made their Red Fleet one of the most feared across the galaxy. Similarly, proxies such as mercenaries and guns for hire are commonly employed by nation states seeking plausible deniability, or because they're simply more cost effective than maintaining their own navy. This may include engagement for a specific contract, or may include sometimes long-term letters of marque, allowing the mercenary free range to attack ships associated with that planet's adversaries. In terms of the second element, the form of war, armed conflict can be separated into two distinct theatres: space and planetary surfaces. In space, wars and battles are fought principally between spacecraft, either merchants or, in the very few cases, standing navies. Battles are typically between smaller flotillas, 15 to 30 ships, ranging from small destroyers and frigates down to picket ships. These conflicts can sometimes also involve orbital assets, such as artillery or point defense networks. Battles are typically rapid, often lasting less than a minute, where one side or the other has initiated combat by surprise. Longer, more drawn-out battles might take place where the objective is to establish complete spaceborne superiority to facilitate a planetary ground invasion. But even where such superiority is established by one side using conventional forces, unconventional means of fighting may then be deployed. Acceleration of asteroids by distant mining stations, the redeployment of solar shades and mirrors to create hyper-intense focal points of heat and light. Even dilapidated pods can be jerry-rigged with anti-grav drives and then sent to be scuttled in the vicinity of the enemy navy, causing the drive itself to overload and go critical. On planet surfaces, wars take on a more traditional historical approach. Armoured fighting vehicles such as tanks and artillery are relatively common and comparatively easy to deploy given the use of anti-gravity fields. However, things such as climate and other environmental conditions may restrict their widespread use and see conflict ultimately fall to armed soldiers, professional or conscripted, supplemented by smaller combat drones. Often soldiers are deployed to hold a planet and therefore are confronted not by an opposing army, but by local insurgencies and citizen revolts. This can lead to frequent examples in the Diaspora of what is effectively asymmetrical warfare, designed to demoralize and disincentivize the maintenance of ground troops by the occupying power. Orbital bombardment and firing capacity likely renders air superiority relevant. However, such capacity is also limited in the face of potential countermeasures, such as anti-gravity powered interceptors and physical shields that would respond rapidly to a projectile or energy weapon being used from orbit, sacrificing itself to intercept the attack. This approach would allow the two theatres of war to be broadly maintained as separate and distinct, creating circumstances where one party might hold one theatre, say space, while the other controls the planet's surface. This can lead to stalemates and result in things such as blockades or attempts to break out, very similar to siege warfare in a medieval context. The third element is that of the weapons of war. We've sort of touched on a number of these already, but I wanted to expressly examine the role of drones in space combat. Intelligent combat drones, or ICDs, would be pre-programmed autonomous drones that would be deployed like a missile or torpedo by a ship, but would itself evade maneuver and then execute its program independently. They would be a one-use affair and would effectively dismantle or disintegrate themselves to deploy their internal weapon of choice. ICDs would be expensive to manufacture, so their use wouldn't be common, yet specific circumstances like hit-and-run strikes on supply chains or other disruptive operations may justify their use. Tactics and stratagems would have therefore been developed on how best to deploy and use ICDs to maximise their success. In terms of other weapons, ship-based weaponry would include things like mines and missiles and direct energy and particle beam cannons and projectile weapons like railguns. None of these would necessarily be standard, however, and the mix of weapons that might be found in a battle between two fleets may be incredibly diverse. For many worlds, unable to support their own domestic navy, they would have to turn to makeshift weapons that would often be developed for use by commercial or civilian craft in times of emergency. And this could include things like tools being used for mining or manufacturing. Another technology that could be used would be that of anti-gravity fields themselves. While I don't think the field could necessarily be used to accelerate a projectile by an individual ship without impacting the firing ship itself, anti-gravity manifolds on orbital launch stations, including those used to launch pods themselves, could be then redeployed and reused to launch projectiles at incoming fleets, particularly given their ability for such manifolds to accelerate matter instantaneously to near-relativistic speeds. This would effectively act as a space cannon, which would have the effect of orbit eliminating the role of large capital ships, particularly when it comes to orbital battles. Maneuverability would be key, so you could avoid the effects of these larger weapons. I think that's where we're going to leave it today. There's always a lot to talk about when war is the concept in question, and hopefully I've conveyed some of the more restrictive themes in the Diaspora that align with our overall vision for the project. And I've definitely gone and drawn on some of these themes for our corresponding lore video out shortly, introducing the planet of Janfar while also demonstrating the role of proxies in conflict between major powers. Thanks again to everybody for all the support to date. If you haven't already, please make sure you put a comment or a question in the section below. Do not hesitate to engage through our brand new Discord server. So that's it. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and may the journey continue.
Hey!